President Trump's lawyers are considering the possibility of special counsel Bob Mueller sitting down with the president. Among their negotiation points, according to the Wall Street Journal tonight, trying to force Mueller to end the Trump-related portion of his investigation within 60 days of the interview. Out front now, the White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal, Peter Nicholas, who broke the story, and former Assistant United States Attorney and former Associate Independent Counsel for the Whitewater investigation, Kim Whaley. Thanks very much to both of you. So, Peter, you're breaking this story. What else are you hearing from your sources?
Well, that this interview with Bob Mueller, the prospect of it has become something of a bargaining chip. And what's happening is President's lawyers know that it's something Bob Mueller wants, and they're trying to see if there could be some concessions that they can get in return. One would be to see if they can get a quick end to this investigation, maybe 60 days after the date of the interview. The other would be possibly limiting the scope of the testimony, so the president wouldn't necessarily have to answer wide-ranging questions that Bob Mueller might necessarily be interested in, but just answer some more general questions that might avoid a perjury trap, just focus on the firing of former FBI Director James Comey, to see if they can just keep that the questioning as limited as possible.
Right, and of course, you know, pretty impossible to think that could fully happen, considering they don't know exactly what Bob Mueller's looking at with the president's personal finances or whatever else it could be, in addition to obstruction of justice. Do they, though, Peter, from your reporting, realistically believe that Bob Mueller is going to say, okay, sure, I'll agree to wrap up the investigation to you in 60 days? Do they really think that's realistic?
Well, they think that they have some leverage here, Aaron, and the leverage would be that they can, if Bob Mueller were to subpoena the president, they could try to quash the subpoena. They could go to court and set in motion a legal process that, by some estimates, could take a year or two, ultimately wind up in the Supreme Court. So if Bob Mueller wants an interview, and he wants it quickly, perhaps he'll agree to some concessions. So that's the leverage that they have. The Trump people have, but we've also talked to some experts in this process who say, look, Bob Mueller is not necessarily going to agree, let the subject of an interview dictate terms. I mean, he's got his own agenda. Right.
All right. So stay with me, please, Kim. You know, if you were Bob Mueller, would you agree to conditions like these, whether it's limiting the scope so severely or to ending the investigation into the president within 60 days of the interview?
No, the second option to me borders on the absurd. I mean, there's virtually no way I can imagine that a prosecutor would agree to arbitrarily and artificially end an investigation on a particular date. Now, we saw this in the Whitewater investigation, but that was when President Clinton was served with a subpoena and agreed in exchange for withdrawing the subpoena and voluntarily appearing before the grand jury to some terms. But that was after a 4-year investigation, and the circumstances were really different. It's hard to imagine that the Mueller team would be taking this seriously at this stage.
And I guess that's the question, is who's got more leverage? I mean, Kim, Trump's team is trying to move the goalpost here again because, as Peter's reporting, you now have this negotiation going on. But Trump himself, obviously, when he's been given the chance, has tried to act like, I have no problem talking to Mueller and I don't need any preconditions. I mean, here he is just a few of the times.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to speak under oath to give your version of those events?
100%.
I would love to do that, and I'd like to do it as soon as possible.
When will you
Good
do
luck,
it, Mr.
everybody.
President? Do you have a date set?
So here's the story.
Do you have a date set, Mr. President?
I don't know. No, I guess they're talking about 2 or 3 weeks, but I would love to do it.
In person.
Again, I have to say, subject to my lawyers and all of that, but I would love to do it.
Kim, do you think an interview ends up happening or not?
I think that an interview will end up happening just because this is a very thorough team of investigators. Now, that being said, we have a president that is used to or has a pattern of flouting the rule of law or not following norms. So there's no way to anticipate how much difficulty this process is going to take. I mean, we also have this looming specter of potentially firing Mueller. We know that he suggested that to his White House counsel, and that would throw the country into a major crisis. So I think that possibility is something the Mueller team has to take seriously that the Whitewater investigation team did not have to think about.
Peter, what's your gut from talking to the sources that you've been talking to on the Trump side? Do they believe that an interview will happen? It's just
they're divided. There are some lawyers on Trump team who really don't want to see an interview. I mean, they feel that this would set a dangerous precedent also for future presidents. That if Trump agrees to an interview, future presidents might be held to that same standard. So they're making that argument as well. And they also understand they have a client who can be kind of chatty, who doesn't necessarily color between the lines. And that could be problematic in an interview because it could present, perhaps present perjury problems. Mueller has shown that he's willing to bring perjury charges. But there are others on the Trump team who are more sanguine about the prospect of an interview and are willing to do it. And so they think that it's one way to shut down this, close this investigation out early. If an interview with Trump is the missing piece in the puzzle, why not provide it, give Mueller what he wants, and then have him move away from Trump?
And of course, that's been their hope, whether that happens or not. I mean, Kim, today there was a lot going on in Mueller land. A former campaign aide, Sam Nunberg, he spent roughly 6 hours testifying before Mueller's grand jury. Of course, we know he had adamantly said he would do no such thing. It would take 90 hours. Well, it didn't. It just took 6. He did not speak to the media afterwards. Was Mueller glad to have Nunberg there, or did Nunberg make today harder for himself after the debacle of earlier this week?
Well, what Nunberg did earlier this week was rather unprecedented, and I think most people watching understood that it was uncomfortable at best. So it's hard to say that it made it harder for Mueller. I mean, they know what they're doing, and they have a wide and broad investigation. And I think it's important to keep in mind, with respect to the president as well, that Mueller has the cards here. Mueller has the power of the subpoena behind him and the grand jury. And so even President Trump doesn't have a lot of cards to play in terms of stopping that. Sure, he can go to court, but I'm also a constitutional law professor, and frankly, I don't think that there is an argument, listen, you can't put a president ultimately before a grand jury for any reason.